In this video, I'm going to show you a really easy way to create an awesome looking fantasy town map. Let's do it. Okay, before I jump into the video, I just want to say, I spend a lot of my time coming up with imaginary worlds for my friends and I to be heroic in. And after watching the murder of George Floyd and seeing the protests going on all over the country, all over the world, I've realized how important it is to stand up to injustice and fight hate in this world. So I'm going to be spending more time listening, learning, donating, acting, and being better. So I hope you'll join me in saying more often and loudly that Black Lives Matter. Okay, so let's talk about creating a fantasy town. So the whole first chapter of the Dungeon Master's Guide is all about creating your own world, and I think creating a town, a small place, you can fill it with NPCs and story really easily. So that's what I did. I looked through here and got some ideas. So the first thing I did was try and come up with a reason that the town is there. So found a little section about how some towns are governed by a group of elders, and then it mentioned that the eldest group of people in a community would be elves or a dragon. And I thought, ooh, a dragon that kind of rules over this area would be super cool. So I thought typical fantasy village, it's at the base of a mountain, maybe it's in a valley next to a river. This dragon has taken over this old fort and is now the leader of this town, and people go to the dragon to settle their disputes, and the dragon protects, the town and the surrounding farmlands in exchange for a tithe of some sort, a tax maybe. So that got me thinking, what could this town give this dragon? And for some reason, my first thought went to Jurassic Park, how the T-Rex eats the goat. So it's gonna have all the townspeople be goat herders and stuff, but then I was like, no, that's too gruesome. So maybe this dragon is here in this particular area because this is the only place in the whole world that can grow these special apples. So all of the farmland and stuff around are apple orchards. The dragon protects the land from orcs and goblins in exchange for all he can eat apples. So yeah, that concept took about 5 minutes to come up with, and that is enough to springboard all kinds of possible quests that your players could go on. Actually, I only spent 5 minutes coming up with a concept, but then I spent probably 30 trying to come up with a cool name for the town and couldn't find anything I liked. So knowing that concept, what I want you to do is leave a comment below of what should this town be called, because I have no idea and I want to name it something cool. Okay, so that's the first step, coming up with a cool, fun concept for your town. Now we can start actually planning things out. Alright, so the next thing I did was make a list of all of the things that would be in a fantasy town. So there's the typical stuff like a blacksmith, a tavern or an inn, stables, maybe a general store. Then I started thinking about what other sort of things would be in a town that centers around growing apples. There would probably be a cartwright and a farrier, just someone who fixes up horseshoes, I think. Maybe there is a world famous bakery in the town. I wanted to have a fort that the dragon lived in, maybe an old kind of ruined fort, and then there was also an old cemetery, which will make sense in future videos. So yeah, just thinking a little bit further about what would make a town seem realistic, what sort of shops and buildings are going to be in this kind of town for it all to make sense. So making a list of everything that's going to be in the town is going to help with the next step, which is figuring out how we're going to draw all the buildings and the trees and the river, all of the actual drawing of the map. So let's get to it. So if you've watched my previous map making videos, you know that I never jump straight into drawing my map. I always make a key first. So what I'm doing here is just figuring out how I want to draw each of the individual elements ahead of time. So this is going to be an overhead map of a town, so the buildings are just going to be the roofs. So drawing a rectangle with a line through it and maybe putting in a little chimney, like you can just make a town out of a bunch of those. Rectangle, line, chimney. I'm doing a couple of variations just to mix things up so the buildings aren't all the same. You know, putting some awnings here and there, and maybe some of the bigger buildings like the inn have a sort of tower. And I'm also spending the time to figure out how I want to draw this fort. So I know it's not going to be a crazy big castle or anything like that, just something that is bigger than all of the buildings. So it's got a couple of towers, a ruined section where the dragon goes in and out. And I was thinking that there would still be a big central room where the townspeople could come and meet with the dragon. That would be like a separate location from where the dragon keeps its hoard of apples and gold and stuff. So for the trees, I'm just doing these little squiggly circles and adding in little details that kind of follow the circle around. And then where there's going to be a more forested area where it's not just standalone trees, I'm sort of keeping that same size circle of the tree, but then overlapping them and kind of breaking them up to make like a clump of trees instead of just individual squiggly circles. And then for the apple orchards, I'm just gonna do pretty much similar trees, but put little dots in there to indicate apples. And then I want them to all be lined up straight, like they're, you know, the apple trees are planted in a straight line to indicate that it's an actual like farm or orchard. And last is the river. So I think it makes sense that this town is next to a river, especially if it's a farming area. So I'm just drawing like a kind of squiggly outline indicating some water with some broken up lines on the inside, throwing in a few rocks and little grass type textures in there too. But the real trick to this is going to come when I get into the actual map, which is right now. Let's get working on the actual map. Alright, so the tools I'm going to be using are a regular sheet of blank white paper. I have a pencil and an eraser. I'm using 3 different size micron or multi-liner pens. These are the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pens. They're my favorite. I have a size medium, a size fine, and a size small. And then the last tool that is 100% not necessary, but I'm gonna give it a shot, are some light gray Copic markers that I'll tell you more about as we get into that later. Okay, so I'm starting with my pencil and the sheet of paper, and all I'm doing here is roughing out the major locations of the map. So I know I'm gonna have this river that kind of runs along the southern side of the town. The fort is gonna be on a hill that's in the northwest part of the map, and the apple orchards are gonna be in the southeast across the river. But really I just wanted this town to be almost like, you know, a single road that runs along the river. And I sort of wanted everything to meet in the middle of the map in this sort of like town square area. As you can see, I am super loosely blocking stuff in. Since I already figured out how I'm gonna draw everything on the key, I'm not spending a bunch of time drawing everything out in pencil. I'm just gonna go straight into inking, which is the next step. Okay, so using the medium, the biggest size pen, I'm going to make an outline of the map, you know, so just drawing the edges of a piece of parchment or something like that. So then I go in with the size F pen and start filling in the major areas. So, you know, gotta get the river in there, and then I lay out all of the buildings. So, you know, these are really really simple to draw. They're just rectangles, you know, with the peaks of the roofs indicated with lines. I personally like to keep things really simple and straightforward and not get too into like making little hatch marks and shading and stuff. But if you want to go crazy with it, you should definitely go for it. So one big thing is I'm not drawing in the road or the pathways yet because I want to make sure that all of the buildings get in there so that the paths can lead to the buildings. And once the buildings are done, then I start adding in the outlines of the trees, sort of filling in the blank spaces of the map with the trees. Side note, real quick, I know I talk about this in all of my videos, but I really want to stress that even if you think you can't draw, you can absolutely draw a map that looks just as good as this, if not better. Honestly, I'm just drawing rectangles with lines, you know, squiggly little circles and little patches of grass. There's no fancy drawing here. So yeah, I just really want to encourage you to give this a shot because there is nothing like throwing down a handmade map in front of your players. I'm telling you, it goes such a long way to get them invested in your game. Or maybe you just have a story you want a map to go along with. I promise, you can do it. Just give it a shot. So now that all the buildings are in, all the trees are in, the fort, the river, the bridge, all figured out, now I can go back in with the size small pen and start adding in details. And actually this pen is running out of ink, so I switch over to a Jelly Roll size 6, just a real simple gel pen, and I'm crossing my fingers that when I get to the markers, it doesn't bleed everywhere. So with this smaller pen, I'm doing the little lines of grass to sort of indicate where the hill goes up near the fort and up around the cemetery and then kind of down to the river. Everything in this town is a dirt or mud road. So I'm not doing any like cobblestone texture or anything like that. I'm just kind of breaking up the lines, you know, adding a little bit of grass, hatch marks here and there, maybe a little rock every once in a while. I'm being real loose with it and not very strict because it's meant to be an imperfect dirt road. For the river, I've added a few of these banks, places where the earth meets the water at maybe more of a sharper angle. Hopefully just these sort of vertical lines kind of give it that sort of feel, and then making it look like water by again having these sort of broken up lines along the edge of the river. I don't know, maybe there's a cooler way to draw water, but hopefully it looks like a river. I'm adding details to the tree, just really loose, broken up little hatch marks, and I try to keep them going in a circle around the inside of the tree. Not perfectly around, but just a little bit of texture to give these squiggly circles a little bit of rounded dimension. All right, once all of the details are filled in, this is looking like a pretty complete map. And you could absolutely stop here, use this map to show to your players, but I'm gonna go one step further. I'm gonna use these light gray Copic markers to get these buildings and trees really popping off the page. So I am using Cool Gray number 0 and Cool Gray number 3. So the number 0, the lighter color, I'm using on the pathway, the roads. I'm just using the brush tip. I'm being really loose. I'm not coloring in the lines super well. So it's really important to me that this looks like a hand-drawn map, and so I'm being fast and loose with the marker to sort of keep that feel going. I'm also going to use this light gray color to completely fill in all of the trees and the more northern and eastern parts of the roofs. So that way when I move over to Cool Gray number 3, the darker color, I can sort of give the buildings a little bit more dimension. So the southwestern part of the roofs of the buildings are going to get the darker shade of gray, and I'm actually going to use this darker color to have the buildings cast a little bit of a shadow. So I'm like intentionally going outside of the lines on the left and bottom sides of all of the buildings and the trees as well. So again, really loose, just using the brush tip to sort of create shadows in the left and bottom portions of the trees and the buildings. So the places with the highest contrast are going to really pop off the map. It's the same concept as using the thicker lines on the more important stuff like the buildings to have them stand out more than the smaller lines of the details like the grass and stuff. So I'm coloring in the river with the dark gray to differentiate it from the roads and pathways, which are the lighter grays. You know, now that I think about it, it probably would have been a good idea to test these markers out on the key. If you're watching along and you want to try out these gray Copic markers, you know, do a few tests on your key or on a separate sheet of paper and figure out how you're going to render everything first before jumping on to your already completely drawn out, already looking awesome town map. And that pretty much covers everything. I think I've got myself a pretty cool looking fantasy town map. Alright, so I am really happy with how this map came out. If you have any questions about the process, leave me a comment below. I look at all the comments and love talking to you down there. Please hit me with some names for this town. I'm the worst at coming up with names. So I think this is a fun concept for a town, and it'd be really cool to have an awesome name to go along with it. Alright, my dudes, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're hanging in there, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!